We've just received the IDF's initial findings on the Israeli strike that killed 7 World Central Kitchen workers in Gaza on Monday. The internal investigation has found Israeli forces believe they were targeting Hamas and, quote, mistakenly assumed 2 Hamas gunmen were in the vehicles in the aid convoy. Israel has now fired 2 military commanders. Let's get right to CNN's Nick Robertson, who joins us now live from Jerusalem. Can you walk us through the findings? It's a couple of pages. And what do you see that might be missing when you look at some of the details of this?
Yeah, sure. This is a sequence of events that the IDF has laid out that they say led to this misidentification and misclarification of the events on the ground. They say the IDF spotted a gunman getting on aid trucks. We're talking about trucks here, the big vehicles that carry the actual pallets and containers of food and other humanitarian supplies. And then the IDF says they saw another gunman, again, a single. So we're talking about 2 gunmen they're saying they see get on the aid truck or aid trucks. Then the convoy goes into the warehouse, and the IDF says what happened next is where the misidentification and misclarification happens. That the IDF then tracked the SUVs, the vehicles leaving the warehouse after the aid trucks had been there. The IDF says they didn't realize these SUVs worked for the World Central Kitchen, despite the fact these were markings are clearly emblazoned on those vehicles. The IDF then says that those vehicles were engaged because the IDF believed that the gunmen were inside those SUVs now, no longer on the aid trucks after they'd been to the warehouse, but inside the SUVs. Now, the IDF says this should not have happened. It was against their protocols and against their rules of engagement. And they have now dismissed a major who was directly involved in the incident and the brigade chief of staff, a reserve colonel, and disciplined the brigade commander as well. Now, the World Central Kitchen say that it is good that the IDF has acknowledged and accepted responsibility. It's good that they have taken disciplinary action. However, they're saying that these outrageous killings, that what the IDF has said so far and what they've done is really of cold comfort. They said that the IDF report shows that the World Central Kitchen workers were doing everything that they should have been doing. But this, of course, leaves many, many questions unanswered. How could it be assumed that the gunmen who'd been on trucks were now inside, and we're talking about 2 gunmen, could be inside 3 different vehicles, and so many more unanswered questions?
Yeah, that's true. We will wait to see what happens. I know the World Central Kitchen founder has asked for an independent investigation that is not done by the IDF. I do want to talk to you about something that has just happened. After this conversation between Netanyahu and President Biden, the aid crossings into northern Gaza opening up, and a dedicated port, Israel says, will be available for aid shipments. What else are you learning there?
Yeah, I think it's kind of key to look at what the White House is saying here. U.S. policy is going to be determined on how Israel moves forward from these statements. And we heard the same from Secretary Blinken today, and it's what Palestinians are telling us as well. It's one thing to hear it from the Israeli government, particularly when they're pushed by the United States to do this, but let's see the reality on the ground. And the context of that, of course, is that back in January this year, the Israeli government said that it was okay for food shipments to come in through the port of Ashdod, which is 20 miles from the Erez crossing. However, those food shipments, when they arrived, were then blocked by protesters. We already know that elements within Prime Minister Netanyahu's government, the right-wing elements, are saying that they didn't agree with this move by the Israeli government. This sets the scene for, again, potential protests to potentially stop convoys. It hasn't happened, but this is why the White House will look closely. And another point of reference here is that when he was here in early February, Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the Israelis that they should be opening the Erez crossing in the north of Gaza because that's where the humanitarian situation is most desperate. That's where people are literally dying of starvation. We just got a figure from people on the ground there today. You know how much it is for 1 kilo, 2.2 pounds of potatoes today? $22. $22 for 2 pounds of potatoes. That's the price of potatoes. That's why people are starving in the north of Gaza right now, and that's why there's going to be so much scrutiny to see if this actually happens, that the US has called so many times for errors to be opened.
Yeah, and the UN agency that's looking at famine says famine is imminent there, a man-made famine. Nick Robertson, thank you so much for all your reporting. Kate?
So this report also comes out as Israel is now, as you guys were just discussing, planning to open another crossing into Gaza to allow more humanitarian aid to flow in. And this is after that phone call between President Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister, where Biden issued an ultimatum that Netanyahu take specific and concrete and measurable steps to protect aid workers or risk losing U.S. support. CNN's Arlette Saenz is at the White House now with much more on this. Arlette, what are you hearing this morning from the White House about this initial review, this initial analysis, this initial report coming out about that strike?
Well, Kate, officials here at the White House were closely waiting and watching for this initial report from the Israelis as they're trying to get some further explanation for what exactly led to that strike on that World Central Kitchen convoy. It comes on the heels of a very blunt conversation between President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday, where Biden warned Israel would face consequences if they do not do more to protect civilians and ease the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Now, in that phone call, a senior administration official tells CNN that Netanyahu admitted that the IDF was to blame for the strike on this convoy. And this morning, we have some interesting new language from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who, ahead of the Israelis' report being released, said that there must be a thorough, independent investigation and full accountability for what happened. Take a listen.
It's also critical that we see an independent, thorough, and fully publicized investigation into the killing of the World Central Kitchen team who were performing heroic work under the most difficult circumstances in trying to get assistance to people who so desperately need it. So we're looking to see that investigation, we're looking to see a public accounting, and we're looking to see accountability in its wake.
Now, this all comes on the heels of what could be one of the most consequential phone calls of this conflict between President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In that phone call, Netanyahu assured the president that Israel would be trying to take steps to prevent incidents like this from happening again. That's according to a senior administration official. One thing that the two men agreed on was that more needed to be done to be able to track where these humanitarian aid workers are in Gaza. There's also was a discussion about the need to get more humanitarian aid into the enclave, and that was through the opening of these access points. As Nick was talking about earlier, just in the hours after this call between Biden and Netanyahu, Israel approved the opening of that Erez crossing in northern Gaza. Now, one thing that Secretary Blinken and other officials here at the White House have stressed is that while they welcome the opening of this crossing, while they welcome the ports, they also want to see the metrics of this, see how many aid trucks are actually getting in, see how much assistance is actually being distributed to the Palestinian people. But really, this call between Biden and Netanyahu will be closely watched, since it was one of the starkest warnings that that Biden has given to Netanyahu about the way that they're conducting their operations, saying that things need to change.
Arlette Saenz at the White House for us. Thank you so much, Arlette.